Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something we all say and hear probably 100 times a day. How are you?
Yeah, such a simple question, right?
You'd think so. But as it turns out, we found some research and articles that are suggesting that there's actually way more to this than meets the eye. So, are you ready to go on this journey with me and uncover all the secrets behind how are you?
Absolutely. It's like a little social ritual, right?
Yeah.
But depending on who you're talking to in this situation, the meaning can change drastically. It's fascinating.
Yeah, so like we were just talking about before we got started, I feel like everybody kind of has that default "I'm good" response, right? But I'm guessing there's more to it than that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like think about it. You say I'm good to your best friend, all excited, and then you mumble I'm good to the cashier at the grocery store. Totally different, right? Just the tone and the body language can completely change the meaning.
Oh yeah, definitely. And then also like, are you actually good? Or are you just saying that?
Right, exactly. And it even goes deeper than that because there's this whole cultural aspect too. In some cultures, it's just like a pleasantry. You don't even expect a real answer.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so let's try to break this down a little bit. Let's say you're in one of those quick interactions with a stranger, somebody passing by you on the street or the barista taking your order. What's the best way to navigate those how are you moments?
Okay, so in those situations, one source had a really good tip. Think about it like matching energy levels. If someone's super peppy, good morning, then you can give them a cheery good morning right back. But if it's more of a formal setting, you can keep it more neutral, like, I'm well, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. So basically, you're being polite and present, but you're not necessarily inviting them to like unload their whole life story on you.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about that balance.
Yeah.
But what about like if it feels forced? You don't want to be fake.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've definitely been in situations where I felt like I had to put on this like overly enthusiastic persona and it just felt kind of weird and disingenuous.
Totally. It's not about being phony. It's more about like reading the situation and responding in a way that feels appropriate and genuine to you. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah. So with strangers, it's like keeping it polite, concise, and matching that energy level.
Got it. But what about when you're talking to people you're actually close to, like your best friend or a family member that I'm good probably isn't going to cut it with them, right?
Right. Totally different situation. With loved ones, it's a chance to be more authentic, more real. I mean, one of the articles we read even talked about this concept called the Johari window from psychology.
Okay, the Johari window. I have no idea what that is. Can you break that down for me?
Oh, yeah, sure. So it's like imagine a window with 4 panes. Each pane represents a different part of yourself, like what you know about yourself, what others know about you, and what's hidden from both you and others.
Okay, I think I'm following so far. So the idea is in close relationships, you want to expand that open area, the stuff you both know and feel comfortable sharing. So when your best friend asks, how are you? It's an opportunity to go beyond just saying, I'm fine, and actually share something real. Whether it's good or bad.
Oh, so like instead of just saying I'm fine, maybe you say, ugh, work is killing me this week, but at least I've got that trip to look forward to next month.
Exactly. Perfect example.
Yeah.
You're acknowledging the tough stuff, but also balancing it out with something positive. And hey, don't forget about asking him back. Like really asking, how are you?
Yeah.
Actually listening to the answer.
Ugh, you're so right. I am so bad at remembering to do that. I get so caught up in like what I'm going to say next that I sometimes forget to actually listen.
I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But it's something to keep in mind. Okay, we've covered strangers, we've covered loved ones. What about using humor? Sometimes a funny response can lighten the mood.
Oh, for sure. Like, I love those little quips people come up with. Like, I'm surviving on coffee and willpower. How about you?
Exactly. One of the sources we looked at had a bunch of these little humorous responses. And what's interesting is that they often use humor that's really relatable. Like everyone understands the struggle of needing that morning coffee.
Yeah, and I like how with that kind of response, you're not just being funny, but you're also low-key inviting the other person to share their experience too.
Yeah, totally. It's a subtle way of saying, hey, let's connect on this shared human experience of, needing coffee to function.
I love that. But of course, you got to know when it's appropriate to use humor, right? You wouldn't want to be cracking jokes at a funeral or something.
Yeah, definitely got to read the room. And sometimes a well-placed "how are you" can be just as effective. Like, instead of trying to be witty, you just turn the question around on them.
Oh, you mean turning it back on them? I never thought about that.
Yeah. It's kind of a subtle shift in the dynamic, right? Instead of just giving a canned response, you're actually expressing genuine interest in how they're doing.
That's interesting. So instead of just saying, "How are you?" back to them, maybe you say something like, "What's new with you?" or "Anything exciting happening on your end?"
Exactly. Those are great examples. They're more open-ended, you know? And it shows that you actually want to hear what they have to say, not just going through the motions.
Wow, I am already starting to rethink my whole approach to these "how are you" interactions. It's amazing how much depth there is to something we often just breeze past.
Right. It's like we're uncovering this whole hidden language of everyday conversation.
Yeah.
And speaking of hidden languages, there's one scenario we haven't really talked about yet. What happens when someone asks you, "How are you?" and you're really not okay?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that is a whole other can of worms. I mean, it happens to all of us at some point, but it can be so awkward and uncomfortable to navigate those situations. So, do you have any tips on how to handle that gracefully?
Yeah. You're right. It is a tricky one. It's all about finding that balance between being authentic, but not, overwhelming the other person, especially if it's someone you don't know that well or don't feel super comfortable confiding in.
Okay, so let's say it's a coworker you run into in the hallway and they ask, "How are you?" But you're having a truly terrible day.
Well, one thing you can try is to offer a brief and honest response without going into too much detail. You could say something like, "I'm having a bit of a rough day, but thanks for asking."
I see. So you're acknowledging their concern, but also kind of setting a boundary.
Exactly. You're not shutting them down completely, but you're also not inviting them to probe further,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. What if it's someone you're closer to, though, like a good friend or a family member? Would you recommend a different approach then?
Definitely. With someone you trust, you might choose to open up a bit more. But even then, it's still important to kind of gauge how much you're willing to share in that moment. You could say something like, "Actually, I'm not doing so great. Can we talk later?" Or, "I'm struggling with briefly mention the issue, but I'm working through it."
Okay, so it's about being honest, but also being mindful of the context and, the other person's capacity to handle whatever you're going through.
Right. And it's also important to remember that you always have the right to say, "I don't want to talk about it." You don't owe anyone an explanation for your feelings.
That is such an important reminder. We often feel this pressure to put on a happy face, even when we're really struggling inside.
It's definitely a societal expectation, but it's not always healthy or authentic. You know, it's okay to have boundaries and to protect your own emotional well-being.
This is making me think about how I handle these situations myself. I tend to just default to "I'm fine," even when I'm not, because it feels easier than trying to explain what's really going on.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do that. But one of the sources we were looking at had a really interesting perspective on this. They said that even just a simple "thanks for asking" can be incredibly powerful in those situations.
Really? Thanks for asking. I never thought about it that way. But it does feel more genuine than a forced "I'm good" when you're really not feeling it.
Right. It's like you're acknowledging their concern and you're appreciating that they asked, but you're not forcing yourself to pretend you're okay when you're not.
I love that. It's subtle but effective.
And sometimes those subtle shifts in our language can make a huge difference in how we communicate and connect with others. You know?
Yeah, it really is amazing how a simple phrase like that can have such a big impact. And, it makes me think about something we were discussing earlier about how these "how are you" exchanges are often just a social ritual. We kind of go through the motions without really thinking about it.
Exactly. It's like a script we all follow.
Yeah.
But when we actually pause and respond with intention, even if it's just a "thanks for asking," we can create a moment of real connection.
It's like we're taking something mundane and elevating it into something more meaningful.
I like that. And it brings us back to what we set out to do in this deep dive. Exploring how to respond to "how are you" in a way that's both authentic and effective.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? From those quick interactions with strangers to the more nuanced situations where you might not be feeling your best.
And let's not forget about the importance of asking, "How are you?" back and actually listening to their response.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street.
Oh, man, you're so right. I'm definitely guilty of forgetting that sometimes.
We all are. But with a little bit of awareness, we can turn those routine "how are you" moments into opportunities for genuine connection and empathy.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I know I'm going to be approaching these interactions differently from now on. It's amazing how much depth there is to something we often take for granted.
I agree. It's like we've peeled back the layers of this seemingly simple question and discovered a whole world of communication and social dynamics.
Well said. So to our listeners out there, as you go about your day and encounter those "how are you" moments, try to be a little more mindful, a little more intentional in your responses. You might be surprised at the difference it makes. And that's a wrap for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.